Yeah, but I'm not going to be, yeah, that's
that's
okay.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I won't be playing with the Switch. That we're keeping an eye on them. Your Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you all to day 2 of the Energy Markets Forum 2023, Navigating the Age of Energy Security. We're delighted to have you here with us. I'm sure many of you were with us yesterday and hope you enjoyed those sessions. And we have a full agenda for you here today as well at the plenary here shortly, and then later on with the roundtables. I'm delighted to extend a special and warm welcome to His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Hamad bin Mohammed al-Sharqi, Crown Prince of Fujairah, and His Highness Sheikh Saleh al-Sharqi, Chairman of the Port of Fujairah. And another welcome to all of you. We trust that those of you who attended the breakfast briefings found those interesting, and will be exploring those topics a little further here later on in the plenary. It goes without further ado, it's my pleasure now to introduce and welcome His Excellency Saif Ahmed Al-Falasi, Group CEO of the ENOC Group, for the industry welcome note. Thank you very much.
Your Highness, Sheikh Mohammed bin Hamad al-Sharqi, Crown Prince of Fujairah, and Your Highness, Sheikh Saleh bin Mohammed al-Sharqi, Chairman of the Board of Fujairah, Your Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. Welcome to the 11th edition of the Energy Market Forum, held under the patronage of His Highness Sheikh Hamad bin Hamad al-Sharqi, the UAE Supreme Council member and ruler of Fujairah. It is truly an honor to stand before industry leaders and participate in remarkable discussion that aim to identify opportunity and challenges within the energy sector locally and regionally. Energy is the lifeblood and the cornerstone of our modern society. And at ENOC Group, we work across multiple segments and ensure that demand is met across every aspect of the energy value chain. This includes processing feedstock into products such as jet fuel, gasoline, diesel, naphtha, LPG, and much more. These are usually stored at our terminal and marketed to diverse customers across the UAE and internationally. This showcases our commitment to elevating the national energy resources that will benefit the residents, while we actively work toward more sustainable and eco-friendly future. As we explore the latest trend in the energy market, from transition to renewable resources and the complication of supply and demand at this energy market forum, let us keep in mind the UAE vision, not only as an energy leader, but also as a responsible steward of our planned future. Together, we can learn from this pioneer effort and continue to drive progress toward more sustainable and energy-efficient world. Thank you for being part of this Energy Market Forum, and I look forward to the insightful discussion and collaboration that will shape the future of energy market. Thank you again, and I am sure we can work together to have a bright future for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Well, we're going to now get started with the official program, and to do that, we're going to do a survey session here up on stage. I'm going to invite my guests, commentators in a couple of minutes. Just to let you know how this will work, hopefully you all have the survey clickers. You found them on your seats. I'm sure many of you have used them before. We'll put the question up. We'll have a few seconds, and the last button you press will be taken as your answer, and then we'll have a look at those results in real time and ask our commentators for their thoughts on that. So I'm delighted to be joined up here, please, and to invite Mark Ostwald, Chief Economist and Global Strategist at ADM Investor Services International, and Peter Maguire, CEO of XM Australia. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Your handheld mics should be working there if you just switch them on when it's your turn. Thanks very much, gentlemen. So I'll ask Emma to put up the first survey question for us. There you go. Brent crude oil has averaged at around $84 a barrel in the first 9 months of this year. Will the average price of Brent oil be higher or lower in the final quarter of this year? Of course, nobody knows the answer to that, but what's the sentiment right now? Will it be higher than the average that we've seen of 84? We've seen it, of course, move a little bit over the last week, gentlemen, just a bit above that level at the moment. Will it be higher or lower in the fourth quarter, and what will that give us for the annual year, I suppose? So a few seconds on the clock, if we could have everybody's thoughts on that, please. Okay. Well, we're in a bullish sentiment in this room, 82%. Pretty categorical there. Peter, I'll go to you first. Surprised? How did you vote? Why?
Well, good morning. I think a couple of things off the, if I look at the results there, 82%, that really demonstrates market sentiment, and as far as what we've seen in the last couple of months, we've seen a huge move to the upside really since the start of July. And then we gave back some of that gains as far as exhaustion when it hit 95. And then naturally over the weekend, we saw those geopolitical hotspots and those tumultuous events, certainly in Israel and Palestine. So there are so many moving parts to this equation, how we look at the next matter of 2.5 months leading into the end of the year. But I agree with the survey, and probably I won't be surprised, possibly, 95 to 100 is very achievable over this next 2.5 months, considering one is market sentiment, secondly, the geopolitical war premium built in, and I just think overall bullish tones to the upside.
Okay, Mark, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it doesn't really surprise me at all. I think for bulk of this year, we've actually been focused much more on the demand side, and now we've started swinging back even before the terrible events at the weekend to looking at the supply side. And in this particular scenario, also there's going to be people asking questions about that excess supply which has been available from Iran, and whether it will be the US will take further thing. I still think the demand factor is there. The other thing which sort of worries me a little bit in the derivatives market is there is a very strong skew to this survey result within the derivatives market, even if some of the froth had been taken off. So I think really what we're in for is higher levels, but in a very, very choppy market.
Okay, so what you're saying is the fundamentals aren't necessarily speaking on that price. There's a lot of technical futures activity going on. Well, let's go to the next question, because that does talk a little bit about demand. And let's look at those figures. Question 2. World oil demand is expected to grow by 2.4 million barrels a day this year. But next year, forecasts are indicating could be half of that, closer to 1.2. What do you expect world oil demand growth will reach in 2024? That forecast obviously is based on different sources, but will it be closer to the 1 million barrels a day, closer to 2 million barrels a day, or 3 million barrels a day. Of course, we had the OPEC Secretary General yesterday here making his comments about global demand and revising their forecasts upwards quite significantly ahead. So there you go. Are we going to be closer to 1, 2, or 3 million barrels a day of demand growth in 2024? Let's get the pulse of the room on that. Okay, well, there you go. The majority are between 1 and 2, so we can say 1.5, which brings us about to that 1.2 level. Mark, I'll go to you first there. I mean, we've seen the figures there, but what is going to be swinging demand forecasts more as we go along? We've had this year, the China expectations at the beginning of the year, the US recessionary impact that could have come on the oil price. We kind of saw those almost reverse in reality, or not meeting expectations. So how are people meant to forecast this going forward with everything really not panning out as we had expected in 2023?
Well, I think the first thing to observe is most of the forecasts for this year were wrong. They'll probably be wrong next year. When one looks at the disappointment at China's growth, the fact of the matter is Chinese oil demand has actually been extraordinarily high and held up. Whether that holds up into next year is a different question. I'd still expect actually we probably troughed in China, and therefore we could get an upside surprise. On the other side of the coin, obviously Europe is about the only thing which we have got right this year is Europe is headed for a recession. There's no question about that. There's fundamental issues in transitioning Europe. It's not a competitive environment, but the US is doing really well. I think really what this says to me is people think it's going to be between 1 and 2, and I think that's probably absolutely, the pivotal point is 1.5. So it's not going to actually be, it's probably going to be better than most people are expecting. I still see the fundamental problem is that we want more in the way of energy transition, but there isn't any capacity, there isn't any scalability, and any demand pull that we've got is going to have to be met by traditional hydrocarbons. And we are, as just been highlighted, really vulnerable to supply disruptions. And that basically suggests to me that basically the supply side is going to be absolutely key, but the demand side should actually hold up better than most people think.
Okay, Peter, I mean, on the demand, so supply side, key, obviously there's some little bit of extra capacity there that OPEC has created this year that it could obviously help with next year. And of course, we have the other new non-OPEC supply always coming on. But on the demand side, Peter, I mean, oil, we keep talking about when will we see demand destruction, at what price will that happen? But is that the problem, the $90 mark, or is actually the interest rate macro policy, is what's going to really impact real demand at the end of the day? So what happens there rather than purely what we see on the oil price?
Well, we're very conscious as far as interest rate policy from central bankers. We're conscious also as far as inflationary, and are we at the end of the rate cycle as far as tightening from the Fed, or are there going to be additional hikes? I think the jury's out with that because, again, if we look back probably 8 or 9 months ago, we were saying that there'd be probably rate cuts right starting now, October and November. Well, that's not the case at all. There's a big chance you're going to see a rate hike next month. So are we going to see continual rate hikes in 24? What impact is that naturally going to have to GDP and demand and equity prices? I think overall, I'm erring on the side, building on what Mark said, I'm probably closer even to 3 million barrels a day. If you go and travel and you see the demand picture and the youth and what's happening in the likes of Asia and China and India and Africa, I just look at, exponential growth. So I think looking at that report yesterday and the presentation from OPEC, 116 million by 2045, I think that possibly will end up being conservative, because there's probably even more demand out there that we've got to be realistic of as far as population growth all across the world, electricity demand, and the mobility of youth. So I think everyone's addicted to crude oil and the energy, and I think overall 24 is going to be a relatively strong year.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Well, let's go to the third question, which addresses sort of forecasts again. And OPEC, exactly, there's a longer-term forecast. Oil demand will soar 15% to 116 million barrels over the next 2 decades. As I mentioned earlier, that's adjusted just from 12 months ago. This forecast comes a few weeks after the IEA said oil demand would peak by 2030. Of course, we all saw in the last month those sort of divergence in forecasts from the different agencies. Do you think these forecasts are based more on concrete research data with the rise in energy security priorities, i.e. we have to plan, we're expecting that demand will go up, or the politics of the energy transition? For example, OPEC producers today see that as progressing energy transition. Let's make the most of it. Let's forecast strong demand. Let's meet that demand, etc. Mark, let me go to, let's get the survey result first, and then we'll go to our commentators. So is it going to be based more on concrete data or energy transition politics and sort of swaying policy today because of that inevitability? Let's put the clock, 10 seconds on the clock, and get your... Wow, that's an interesting result. 68%. Mark, I'll go to you with that. That's surprised me.
That certainly surprised me. I think the different views that we get every month from OPEC, the EIA and the IEA, are basically always a function of local specifics. So OPEC is looking at the demand side and basically realistically, as the Secretary General pointed out yesterday, basically saying, we're not going to scale up in terms of energy transition, therefore oil demand is naturally going to be higher because there isn't the capacity elsewhere. And that I 100% would agree with. Nevertheless, I still think some of the IEA forecasts are, because it's heavily influenced by Europe, and Europe wants to be seen to be doing the right thing in terms of the energy transition, so it's far more influenced by that. So somewhere along the line, I would go more towards the OPEC side than the IEA side. Simply because looking at Europe, you don't see the scaling up, you don't see the incentives. It's all stick and no carrot in terms of the energy transition, and therefore, hydrocarbons are still going to be ruling the day for a lot longer than European governments would like. But that's mostly virtue signaling. I'm sorry to be so cynical.
Yeah, and that's Europe, of course. But of course, the demand that's really coming is from Asia, from the global south. And they're way behind on the transition, clearly because of funding and other challenges. Peter, your thoughts on the question?
Yeah, well, it certainly surprised both Mark and I because we mentioned we thought that it'd be probably erring to the upside, 68 to 70% on the research data. So it's certainly surprised us. When we look at this, I think the realisation is it'd be interesting to look at the metrics and the voting of the cohort here. And are they with a European slant versus an Asian slant in the sense of how they're biased? And so there's always, you look at the numbers and, the quantitative research to determine where you see the data. But I've got to say that we are very much in a differing world. I think the mood in Asia is one of very much a different mindset to certainly Europe. And if I look at the likes of Indonesia and big populations, Malaysia and certainly China and India, it makes up such a huge component of world population. And that can't be dismissed in emerging economies like Africa as well and South America. So I think that when I look at the consumption patterns, I take on board what those, the views and the data sets. I've got to be very mindful that it's easy to get it wrong, quite simply because we're looking at current data and there are so many inputs that need to be considered to try and get to that end result. So I still err on the side that 116 million is going to be, I think, a conservative number moving into 2045, and population growth is going to be enormous, as we all very well know, and they all want mobility.
Of course, and with, and again, I mean, even at these prices, or is inflation taking care of that?
Well, the price is the price, and we've got to be conscious of that, and there's naturally, it's a lot cheaper than it was in 2008, in the sense where we were at $140 odd a barrel and now we're only at 85. Wages have gone up and it's just the cost of what it actually costs. There's no way around that. So that's the simple, I think, situation, and it's just the world of oil and the world of energy.
Peter Maguire, Mark Oswald, thank you so much for your comments. Thank you. Please, a round of applause for the gentlemen. Thank you so much. Well, it's my pleasure now to invite Sean Evers, who is Managing Partner at Gulf Intelligence. He's going to be conducting the forum feature interview. Well, there you go, Sean. Over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Diala, and Your Highness, welcome once again. Thank you for joining us and hosting us all here in Fujairah today. The session we're just about to kick off that I'm chairing is all about the UAE and the UAE energy outlook, which obviously this 2050 strategy was published this year, and it is an incredibly important subject at this time, and very much pronounced with COP28 coming, but also even without COP28, the UAE diverse energy mix was already a center of great focus and priority. And we've seen that even 15 years ago when the nuclear plants were first announced, and everything since then, renewables and so forth. But one of the questions that remain, which is very important across the country, is the integration of this infrastructure, and now what the legacy infrastructure, oil and gas, pipelines and all of the thing, match up with the new infrastructure. With just arriving in Fujairah, literally as we have arrived in the last few days, is the rail network. I mean, across the country, the train is arriving into Fujairah and all over the country. What does that mean? And those are some of the questions that we're going to discuss this morning. And it gives me great pleasure to kick off our session by starting with His Excellency Sharif Salim Olama, Under-Secretary for Energy and Petroleum Affairs at the UAE Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure, who's been so kind to cooperate with our new innovative setup here where we're standing today and not sitting. And I'm sure he's had a very comfortable seat, but nonetheless. I want to start with, whoops, what's that? Two microphones, where did that come from? One gave birth to the other.
Good start.
Yeah. I'll leave that there. I want to start with you have been of the many portfolios you carry, the big one of hydrogen. If we didn't have COP and other things dominated the conversation, we would have hydrogen as a very big factor in the topic of leading subjects to tackle this year. I wanted to get your update of what steps the UAE has taken tangibly, because there's so many headlines, it's hard to really know, is hydrogen, can I knock on it? Is it happening? Is it a headline? So give us a tangible update, I think would be useful. And if we'll take that conversation into what role existing energy and logistics infrastructure, like in Fujairah, could play in realizing these goals. So perhaps starting with that.
Sure. Thank you, Shan. The hydrogen hype, yes, it is a global phenomena that is picking up. My take on hydrogen is it is definitely happening, and we are taking measurable steps in terms of delivering what we anticipate to be a major contributor to our vision for diversifying our energy mix. As you are aware, we launched our hydrogen strategy, or actually we had a soft launch by getting the approval from the cabinet back in July. I'll give you some high-level insights into the strategy. Today, as we speak, we have around 7 projects that are currently in different levels of maturity in the country. We anticipate by the year 2031, we will be producing around 1.4 million tons of hydrogen per annum. This includes both green and blue hydrogen.
As a data point, what are we doing now? 1.4 by 2030? What are we producing now?
Today, the amount of hydrogen that we are producing basically is not green or blue. They are gray hydrogen in our refineries.
Right.
And the quantities are very limited.
But you have done some cargoes to Europe and Japan, right?
Correct. And the cargoes that we have done have been test cargoes through ADNOC. It was been blue ammonia that we have sent to Hamburg in Germany and also to Japan through ADNOC. The other thing that we're also working on is something also new, is we are doing some certain studies to produce pink hydrogen. And this is going to be produced.
Pink?
Yes.
What is pink? Sorry.
It's basically capitalizing on the heat from our nuclear reactors.
Wow.
So we are not leaving any stones unturned, and we are looking at the entire perspective.
Just hold the mic a little bit higher.
Sorry. Yeah. Now, the other things that we are doing as well is one of the major challenges we have with hydrogen is cost. So as you know, the UAE, as part of our overall strategy, we started with renewable energy back in 2006 when Masdar was formed. Back then, the kilowatt hour was around 33 fils. Today, we're talking about 33 dollar cents. Today, we're at around 1.32 dollar cents. So there's a big difference of how much we have improved. It is critical for green hydrogen because you need cheap energy to produce green hydrogen. Today, green hydrogen is sold in the market at around $6 to $8, which is still excessive.
Globally.
And one of the efforts that we are doing is we are trying to find solutions, going into R&D aspects, research, and find different solutions to bring that cost down. The other aspect of hydrogen is looking into transportation and distribution.
On that point, transportation and distribution, inevitably hydrogen is a little bit like LNG was back in the day.
Exactly.
Where you've got to have a customer, you've got to build a huge amount of infrastructure, you've got to align your regulation. Talk us a little bit through how we're dealing with that, because of course there's a lot of pieces there you don't have control of.
Correct. Now, from a customer perspective, of course, we have a number of international partnerships that have been established with Germany, with Japan, with India, with South Korea. All of these countries have huge hydrogen demand. Japan, as I understand, by the year 2030 require around 2.1 to 3 million tons of hydrogen. That will go up to 12 by 2040 and up to 20 by 2050. The same goes for India. You can multiply that by 2 to 3. And what we're doing with these international partners is we are exchanging with them their technologies. So we are attracting a lot of the technology providers. We are also understanding from them what the policies and regulations they have established to establish a hydrogen economy in their countries. There is a very important factor, which is the certification. Eventually, when we are to export hydrogen, the certification requirements needs to match with the importing country. So we're working with our international partners in that.
And does that need to be standardized globally? I mean,
correct.
You can't have bespoke standards, can you, in every market you go to?
No. And so far it is fragmented, I'll be very frank with you. And we are trying on a global level with international organizations like the IPHE and others to establish a standard certification process. We are in direct touch also with the EU Commission to agree on a standard certification, so it would enable us to export to Europe. Now, when we talk about infrastructure, also there is a lot that we need to do. So one of the things we are doing, we have a company that we are dealing with, is called Hydrogenius.
Just hold the mic again.
Sorry. Hydrogenius is a company that is looking into transporting hydrogen through an organic carrier and storing it. So basically, we want to utilize our current infrastructure, gas pipelines, to transport hydrogen.
Which is kind of touching on the follow-up question is, how are we going to use the legacy infrastructure that's already in place?
Exactly.
And bringing in Fujairah into that answer question in terms of, is there a role for that?
Definitely. As part of the hydrogen strategy, we have identified hydrogen oases. On a global level, these are known as hydrogen valleys. We call them oases because it is more relevant to our part of the world. We have identified 2 hydrogen oases already. One is in Ruwais and the other is in Kizad, in Abu Dhabi. But from my perspective, I see Fujairah as a front runner to become one of the future hydrogen oases that we will have in the country. Fujairah is the third biggest bunkering port in the world. It has all the infrastructure required to actually enable hydrogen. It has storage facilities. It is comparable to Rotterdam. I was in Rotterdam back in May, and the things I saw over there are almost similar to what we have over here. Of course, they have a little bit more advanced where they have certain liquefaction facilities that are available, which are things that we will work with the port authorities to see how we can upgrade the ports to allow this. Fujairah is also key in terms of its geographical location, all the shipping routes. It allows us to import all the equipment we need to produce hydrogen over here, and it will allow us to export hydrogen to the likes of Japan, South Korea, and others.
When you say you have the vision of oasis, hydrogen oasis, hydrogen hubs, two already, Kizad and Ruwais, is that any particular color for those oases?
Yes.
Green, blue?
I always say is we are not racist. we welcome all colors. So at this stage, I have to be very practical. Blue hydrogen is economically feasible, and this is where we're going to start off with. And this will eventually transition into green. We've seen that actually in Europe. When I started my career in the ministry, I was discussing with the German counterparts. The first thing they told me is we only deal with green. They have just revised their strategy, and they are looking at blue as well. It just makes sense.
That is great. I mean, we heard it here first. So Fujairah, potential hub for one of the hydrogen oases in the UAE. That's very exciting. That's a North Star that I think we should all sort of put into our focus. Before we invite our other panelists to join this UAE session, I want to get the audience back to work and on their clickers to give us their views on this question. I know we didn't bring up a clicker for you, but if there is any extra, we could bring them to the stage. So if we might just bring up the next survey question, which is about this question of integrated infrastructure. Should the UAE integrate the country's legacy energy infrastructure with the development of the new low-carbon energy infrastructure? That's the question. And before we put on the clock, we wouldn't want His Excellency having to answer a question that he doesn't get to vote on.
I'll answer it verbally.
Regardless, yeah. So 10 seconds, please. Should the UAE integrate the country's legacy energy infrastructure with the development of the new low-carbon energy infrastructure? It would seem like a no-brainer to a certain extent. And as we get the results, there it is. I suppose it's the overwhelming sense there's only one answer. I want to welcome up our other panelists to join us in this UAE session. Ali Al-Jarwan, the CEO of Dragon Oil, please come to the stage. I'd also like to invite Hatem El-Moussa, CEO of Sharjah National Oil Corporation, to come to the stage. And that's it, I think, believe me. Yes, I've got everybody. Sorry, I'm also missing Robin Mills. Robin Mills, the CEO of Kamar Energy, to come to the stage. You have a mic. Here's the microphone. Thanks. You all have your microphone. I wanted to bring everybody into that conversation, and Ali, you are the CEO of a hydrocarbon oil producer, obviously many years in ADNOC. Your thoughts generally on that question of legacy infrastructure and its future in the new low-carbon economy?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. And I could say that UAE is really a pioneering country. Have leads in, executing all new things. Renewable, one of the major commitment for UAE. Of course, practically speaking, we are oil and gas, and we started something like 70 years ago. And we are resilient in terms of responding to the market, from production capacity, from storage, from most of all the excellent relationship left to us by His Highness Sheikh Zayed, Allah yarhamah. Together with this major commitment to oil production capacity, UAE is really the new direction to build capacity to 5 million barrel per day by 2027. And parallel to this, there is extensive effort, to look to improve or generate more alternative, clean energies. In solar, we are one of the pioneers in the Gulf states, in Masdar and Dubai, also DIWA solar model, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid solar city, already producing, and now the contribution around 20%. Nuclear plants in Abu Dhabi, one of its kind, it have big capacity to do. And now we heard from His Excellency the commitment of the country for hydrogen. So UAE is really of all brands, if you like, pursuing in parallel the renewable and building capacity to respond to the market, forecasted high demand.
Thank you. Robin, if you might give us your thoughts on some of the challenges that outlined by the destination of His Excellency in terms of the country's very ambitious hydrogen goals. You've written a lot about this. Clearly, you see the logic and at the same token identify the challenges. Where do you think they are, and where does integrated infrastructure play into those challenges?
Yes, so thanks, Sean. As you say, I and we have written extensively on hydrogen. We're big fans, but we're also realistic, and we see hydrogen is a new technology. It's very promising. It's also very challenging, and His Excellency mentioned the challenge of cost, and that really is I think the critical challenge right now. Green hydrogen, even blue hydrogen today, relatively expensive, particularly if you compare it to gas. Yes, it's low carbon, but that low carbon isn't yet enough to bridge the cost differential. So we need to bring down the cost of producing both blue and green hydrogen, particularly green. And there's a lot of technology elements on that, but a lot of it is just about building an industry. And the green hydrogen industry basically today doesn't exist. It's less than 1% of global hydrogen production, and we need to turn it into a major industry by 2030, both here and around the world. So that's the first challenge, is scaling up, doing what the UAE and others have done very successfully in solar power and elsewhere in wind and so on. And then in any of the transport side, and I think this is even more challenging. Hydrogen is not an easy thing to move around the world. It is not going to be like oil or gas. The Middle East is not going to be a center of sending pure hydrogen to Japan and Europe. The real opportunity here is to turn it into other things and generate much broader-based economic growth. So ammonia is the first step, and ammonia is a fertilizer, but it can also be a fuel, but then into green steel, other green materials, methanol, chemicals, all kind of other downstream products, which are much easier to transport around the world, but also that generate much more value locally. So I think that's the real opportunity, and the UAE has definitely seen this.
Is there in that just that opportunity, Robin, as a follow-up, with the hydrogen surge, the hype, as His Excellency may have framed it, does there have to be a winner? Can there be multiple centers for hydrogen, or is first mover advantage going to be fairly determinative?
So, I think we've been through the hydrogen hype, and I think we're now entering the stage of reality and actually trying to build things. And then the next few years they'll start operating, and we'll see how successful they are. But it's going to be a competitive business, because for green hydrogen you need open land, you need sun, perhaps you need wind, you need some port access. A lot of countries have that, not just the UAE, but North Africa, Australia, some parts of South America, many other places. So to be a winner in this, I think you have to do more than that. You also have to have all the natural advantages, but the created advantages as well. So infrastructure, good regulation, institutions, technology, access, finance, all these kind of things as well. That's what I think might make the winners. And there can be more than one winner. There could be several winners around the world, but not everybody will be a winner.
Hatem, I wanted to bring in on this subject of the integration of legacy infrastructure, oil and gas infrastructure, with the new low-carbon economy, low-carbon development. And tell us a little bit about how you've tackled that, and with your underground gas storage facility that you are developing, and how that could be integrated with the low-carbon economy and industry.
Thanks, Sean, for the question. of course, for blue hydrogen, which is going to be a major factor for all existing oil and gas producers, especially gas producers. To be able to produce blue hydrogen, you need to get rid of the CO2 somewhere. And that goes hand in hand with carbon sequestration and storage. So with all of these oil-producing countries, they typically would have reservoirs that have been depleted. For example, Sharjah has an ideal reservoir that's perfectly suited to capture and store the CO2 coming out of the production of blue hydrogen. As His Excellency Sharif mentioned, that blue hydrogen is a transition fuel before green hydrogen. So the availability of such facilities is a major catalyst to achieve this transition from blue hydrogen to green hydrogen.
You're actually on that point. If you might just comment on what that kind of facility, that kind of integration is going to be required for realizing these, the ambition of these different hydrogen oases, that you have facilities like SNOC is developing in Sharjah.
Definitely, Sean. Utilizing depleted reservoirs is one solution. We have seen different approaches taken by ADNOC. For example, they are looking at also storing CO2 in salt domes. They're looking at storing CO2 in aquifers, and even using CO2 for mineralization and injecting them into rock formations. So there is a number of methods that you can actually apply in terms of getting rid of the CO2, which is critical to produce the blue hydrogen.
Let's go to the next survey question and bring the audience back in on this subject. If we could please bring up question 2. The updated UAE energy strategy aims to promote the deployment of renewable and nuclear energies, enhance energy efficiency, increase local clean energy capacity. Will existing industries be held accountable to decarbonize their activities as part of the 2050 national strategy? That is the question. Being held accountable to decarbonize, how important that is. If we might, 10 seconds on this question. Because all of us, whatever you're doing, obviously we fall into playing a part in that activity, and what does that mean for production? I wanted, again, I suppose it's the big yes answer. Ali, I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because obviously you're operating assets all over the world, I mean, in various geographies. How do you observe those? We talked a little bit earlier about hydrogen requirements, maybe differing standardization, certification. How is decarbonization being implemented in the different operating zones that you're in, and what can we learn from them here?
Yeah, first of all, I think the learning model is United Arab Emirates here. I believe in this because of the capabilities available, especially in the project management. We have really a lot of expertise, proven very complicated projects, which could be transformed to do, you know, for the new hydrocarbon, new clean energies, if you like. We are operating in Egypt with zero flaring, to give you an example. Now we are processing the gas in Iraq with appetite from the government, with pressure even, really very positive. In Turkmenistan, we try to promote the government, and we have really good relationship to pilot the hydrogen, to do, you know, gas to liquid also, so that we really fully utilize the gas and learn to implement the best practice in the green area, I mean, good practice of oil, if you like.
Your Excellency, on the question of accountability and decarbonization, there's a lot of talk, a lot of obviously encouragement, particularly in this COP window. Will the UAE, as a policymaker, will there be more stricter decarbonization requirements for industry to adhere to going forward?
Definitely, Sean. Sean, we have launched through the cabinet a demand supply management program. It's a national program, comprehensive, that I lead, and it has a representation from all the local governments. So all the local municipalities, the departments of transportation, and industries are included in this high-level committee. 4 main sectors we are discussing: industries, transportation, buildings, and agriculture. The targets we have set: a reduction of 40% in power consumption and a reduction of 50% in water consumption. This will save the country around 226 billion by the year 2050. So there is a comprehensive program. There is a DSM portal that we actually monitor how each of the sectors is performing. So when you look at the transportation sector, we have huge plans in terms of developing an infrastructure for EVs and how we transfer from the year 2050 being around 50% electric vehicles in the country. When you look at the industry sector, we have done a comprehensive study for the 50 biggest plants in the UAE, and we have put in recommendations in terms of how they will improve their energy efficiency. This includes the processes that they follow, manufacturing processes that are simplified and consume less power, like 3D printing, and then also utilizing equipment that are higher efficient. So the higher efficiency you have, the less emissions.
Hatem, how are you tackling this at Sharjah National Oil Company, getting out in front before there's a big stick to hold you accountable? What is Sharjah National Oil Corporation doing about decarbonization?
Yeah, we recently actually made a very aggressive announcement that we want to achieve net zero on our own operations by 2032, within 10 years. The announcement was made last year.
Net zero by 2032. The country is 2050. That's quite an ambitious target.
It's an ambitious target, and we have to do whatever is possible to achieve it. Of course, for the country to be able to achieve its target by 2050, all the players have to have reached that by that time. So we expect different players to reach it at different stages. The very first step to achieve this target was an announcement we made in ADIPEC last week of building our own solar power plant, 60 megawatt. That will get us a significant part of the way towards achieving our net zero target. We'll be immediately also looking, and we already initiated studies of how to convert our gas consuming equipment to run on electricity. And that would get us a significant part of the way also to achieving net zero. The remainder, we'll have to find other creative methods to get us the last 20
What
or
do you
30%.
think about the idea of accountability, held to regulatory obligations, 40, 50%, some very big numbers there that His Excellency has mentioned?
Definitely, to be able to achieve net zero, you have to be able to measure your emissions today. Have it measured, verified, reported by independent parties. We have already issued internally our greenhouse gas emissions report for the years 2021 and 2022 to establish the baseline for SNOC. And we are in the process of getting it verified by an independent third party. Once that's done, it will be published, and we hope that we will be also setting an example for the industry that on transparency of emissions, because without accurate measurement and reporting of your own emissions, how can you verify that you're achieving your own net zero?
Robin, your decarbonization, again, probably competes with hydrogen as the word of the year, but how real is it? How important is it? Can I keep my head buried in the sand, so to speak, and it'll pass me by when COP passes? Or is this, do you think, as His Excellency has said, there's some very serious accountability coming?
Yeah, hydrogen was probably last year's word, Sean, and
Yeah.
decarbonisation is this year's word.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I take it very seriously, and you know, it was a major theme at ADIPEC, and that is, you know, as we saw, that's not just a conference thing. No, that's a very serious commitment. We see this through all our work within UAE entities, government, companies. You know, absolutely, decarbonisation is a critical thing, and everyone's thinking very hard. And it's, you know, it's not easy, but everyone is thinking very hard, and they know that they have a commitment. Everybody sees where they have to be by 2030 and by 2040 and 50, and they're thinking very hard how to get there.
And your thoughts on setting some very specific regulatory requirements on that? Do you think industry would respond positively to that? Is that what's needed?
You know, look, I think it's a balance. I think there are some elements of regulation. I think there are some elements of help. And again, His Excellency mentions the energy efficiency program. You know, that's obviously critical. There are some elements of national strategy like hydrogen strategy, the carbon capture strategy, which will serve everybody, which will serve the power sector and the industrial sector and others as well, but they have to be done at a national level. And then there are price incentives, you know, and at some point, and it's mentioned in the UAE's climate communications, there'll likely be a carbon price here of some kind. There'll be contracts for so-called contracts for difference for hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. You know, details are not really, you know, clear at the moment, but they're mentioned and they're clearly out there as options. And the price element is critical. You know, regulations are important, they're helpful, but we also need to see some prices that will support decarbonisation.
Carbon prices.
Carbon prices and prices for CCS and for hydrogen to give the right incentive.
Let's go to the last question, and because I want to talk just finally about the integration of UAE energy infrastructure, because I think that is quite an important question. Should the UAE prioritize integrating the national energy network infrastructure and power grids across the 7 Emirates to ensure industrial development across the country? We've seen, obviously, talk and action about integrating GCC-wide power grids, but what's the emphasis and the priority needed for within the UAE? 10 seconds on that. It's one of those sort of lopsided questions where I suppose no, it isn't an option, but nonetheless, it's there. Before we get the answer, Your Excellency, your thoughts on the need for that? I mean, we have a lot of challenges in the Northern Emirates still to get the necessary power for industrial development. How big a priority is it for the ministry and for national policy? If there's a result on that question, please post it. Thank you. Well, there it is, yeah. So the 9%, please stand up. No.
No, it's definitely high on our agenda. Today, the UAE is interconnected with the GCC. We have a Gulf Cooperation Countries Interconnection Authority that actually provides 3 major benefits. One, it's emergency support, so each country supports the other in terms of if there are an emergency or blackouts. Second, it provides spinning reserve. And third, it allows electricity trade. Now, we took that model and we have expanded it, and just recently we have announced that we have formed the electricity market in the UAE. And the idea for the electricity market is we do have 4 major authorities in the country. There is Abu Dhabi, and then there is Dubai with DEWA, there is Siwa and Sharjah, and then there is Ittihad Water and Electricity in the Northern Emirates. The idea over here is to allow trade between the 4 authorities to get, you know, a competition between the authorities to bring down the prices, be more efficient. Of course, this is just the first phase. The idea over here is we want to expand this further to go towards the industries, the heavy industries that consume a lot of power, and give these industries the opportunity to buy the cheapest power and the more efficient power that is available in the market. You notice that ADNOC and EGA, for example, industries, have announced that they want to go green. So they are actually signing deals with IWIC to buy the entire amount of renewable energy and nuclear energy for their operations. This is one step that they have taken in that direction. And we're promoting this across the country.
Hatem, I'd like to, if you just tell us a little bit about the other deal you signed last week, which I think speaks to this point quite profoundly, with RAK Gas, and what's the logic of that deal?
It's very similar to the logic that's mentioned here about integrating grid and pipeline infrastructure. We need to also integrate gas storage infrastructure. And Sharjah has its own gas storage facility and plant that's designed originally to manage the flexibilities and variations for seasonal demand and supply for Siwa, for Sharjah's demand. But once you have this infrastructure available, ideally you really want to make this available for the country. Energy security overall. The signature between Sharjah and Ras Al Khaimah is a step forward in this direction, and I expect it would be followed by further steps.
Just tell us a little bit exactly what the agreement was, because I think it's important to understand it, why it happened, and what exactly are you agreeing with Ras Al Khaimah?
Ras Al Khaimah has its own, of course, gas demand and supply issues. Ras Al Khaimah is the main authority in Ras Al Khaimah that manages the gas and demand and supply. And with this agreement, Ras Al Khaimah will have access to Sharjah's storage to be able to store excess gas when it's available in Sharjah and retrieve it when they need it in Ras Al Khaimah. Also, that amount will be readily available to Ras Al Khaimah as well as it is to Sharjah for managing any emergencies or unexpected changes in either supply or demand.
Robin, if you might just speak a little bit to this issue as a whole, with the energy wealth of the UAE, obviously still very much concentrated in certain parts of the UAE, that getting that integrated energy infrastructure, how important it is, what's needed there, do you think, from your perspective?
Yeah, I find this is a really interesting question. It's particularly relevant, where we are today in Fujairah, right? I think different parts of the UAE have different natural resources, different geographic advantages. A lot of this integration sign is about trying to make the best use of those advantages. Fujairah obviously has done it for many years. Its advantage on being on the Indian Ocean coast and the oil storage and so on that we're all very, very familiar with. But building on that, we had some interesting things recently. We had at ADIPEC the announcement of the wind power project by Masdar, which includes a wind farm in Fujairah as well as some other places. Obviously, you have Ras Al Khaimah and you have Sharjah, which have potential for CO2 storage and potentially hydrogen production and so on as well. So I think making best use of those advantages is critical. And in terms of that, I think we've talked about these hydrogen oases, and I kind of see them as kind of hydrogen and carbon oases. They're about concentrating hydrogen production and industry using hydrogen in certain advantageous spots, and also the CO2 storage, gathering CO2 from a number of facilities, power plants, industries, whatever, and bringing that into a national network where it can be stored, whether in Sharjah or in Abu Dhabi or elsewhere.
Last word to you, Ali, because I think the other side of this coin, an integrated UAE energy infrastructure, but is the external engagement. We're seeing increasingly UAE energy companies going out in the world. I mean, Masdar obviously and the renewables have been doing it for a while, but on the oil and gas side, even now ADNOC looking to go international. Obviously, Dragon has been doing it for many years. What do you think is the scale that can reach and the opportunity there for national energy companies and oil and gas companies going out into the world and growing? And we're seeing other national companies doing it as well.
First of all, let me shed the light about UAE here.
Yeah.
About the integration. I think there is 4 elements coming. Ministry of Energy already have really good strategy at the beginning. This is start, but this should be evolving. And the second thing is really the regulation of the government. There should be central regulation to be monitored year by year to affect the development. The third one is really financing. And Abu Dhabi government already announced in previous ADIPEC, not this one, the one before, to avail $500 billion jointly with USA for renewable energies worldwide. I think we should take benefit of this one. And the fourth point, research and development. And UAE already, have a lot of universities, a lot of R&D. Abu Dhabi, I worked with Petroleum Institute. We already have some R&D, which will be the key answer for so many projects. Internationally, should be collaboration also between us and host governments. And we already introduced the environmental initiatives of recycling to Egypt through one of the operator here in Sharjah, national company, environmental company. This will be increased more and more. And we are both, I think, look to UAE as role model.
As role model.
As role model in the transformation. And I will give you example, Turkmenistan government have really big and strong ties with our governments.
That's where you're operating in Turkmenistan.
We operate, and there is, triangle communication, if you like, between us, Turkmenistan, and United Arab Emirates. This should be improved with time. We should get advices and best practice from UAE to be transported outside.
And also to bring those countries to here, Fujairah and others. I mean, the more that the national oil companies and Dragon to ADNOC, from small to large,
engage partners in variety of countries is a great opportunity to bring those countries also here. We're going to have to wrap up this session. It's right on the nose, our time, 10 o'clock. I thank our panelists. Please join me in thanking our panelists, His Excellency Sharif Al-Alama, Ali Al-Jarwan, Hatem El-Mosa, and Robin Mills. Please take your seats. Thank you very much. And thank you for being good sports in doing the podium panel. I appreciate that. One of my new favorite things in the Energy Markets Forum that we introduced last year is the International Energy Journalism Awards. I'm a little bit biased because, of course, as a journalist of many years, it's a critical part of our society, of our economy, but also of our industry. And there are a number of great journalists that are working in the UAE and in the Middle East covering the regional energy story, and it's so important that they do it, and they do it well with knowledge and understanding of what is a pretty complicated subject. I mean, you just heard 1 hour, less than 40 minutes of talk about hydrogen and all of its pieces. And we work in the industry and we get our heads around it as best we can. You can imagine being a journalist having to do that from one subject to the next. It's complicated, and I think they do the best that they can do, and definitely deserve acknowledgement. And that's what we want to bring into the Energy Markets Forum, is acknowledgement of those journalists who are working and covering our industry, and particularly covering the energy markets. And we're honored that His Highness has agreed to make these awards in his presence, and we will shortly invite him up to the stage to do so. We'd also like to thank our partners. We've had Aramco Trading for a number of years as our partner in the New Silk Road CEO of the Year Awards, which of course were presented at the gala dinner last night. And now we have our partner with Mercantile and Maritime for the International Energy Journalism Awards, which of course Mercantile and Maritime are a new operating company in Fujairah, having recently acquired one of the storage assets here. So energy journalism and this International Selection Committee, we call them the IEJAs. It's okay, we'll leave them without the banners up on the stage because we have, of course, our beautiful screen. The IEJA Awards are decided and overseen by a selection committee, an international selection committee of existing and former journalists who are all up on the stage now, and some of them are in the room and some were unable to attend today. But of course, they have all, let's just say, many years under their belt in terms of all of the aspects of the energy story. And so they reviewed all of the nominees and scored all of the nominees according to a certain degree of agreed criteria. And so all of the selection, all of the nominees went through the rigor of, there's nothing like peer rigor, right? It tends to be a little bit more brutal, and inevitably all of these people on the board today, at least in our sector, are recognized as pretty much leading energy journalists, or have been in the past. So the first category that was recognized, and the short list of 3 after they were scored by this selection committee, was the Middle East media in Arabic language. And the top 3 candidates that were recognized were Mohammed Fahmy, business news presenter at Asharq, Paula Nufal, senior reporter at CNN Business Arabic, and Lubna Boussa, editor-in-chief, business news at Sky News Arabia. They came up the top 3 ranked, and of course one of them is the winner, but we won't announce their name until we've gone through the different categories. The next category was Middle East media in English language, and the top 3 nominees there were Faiza Rizvi, former editor, Oil and Gas Middle East of ITP Media Group, Brandy Scott, presenter Business Breakfast, Dubai Eye Radio, and of course she did the feature interview yesterday with the OPEC Secretary General, and Ben Van Hoevelen, editor-in-chief of the Iraq Oil Report, which of course is doing great work in Iraq, the Iraq Oil Report. That was the category Middle East media in English. Middle East media meaning Middle East-based media, Middle East founded media companies. And the next section is international energy specialist media, which it was also shortlisted. Specialist media is typically industry publications, newsletters like Meese and Mead and Argus and Platts, and those that media that specialize in commodities and energy. And if you have problems seeing, there's obviously the screens above and obviously the back screen. But we had Nishal Ukul, editor, Middle East, South Asia at Upstream, Nader Atayem, Middle East Bureau Chief at Argus Media, and Herman Wang, Associate Director, EMEA Upstream News, S&P Global Commodity Insights. And these are international energy media specialists. They may be based in the region, they may not be, but they cover the region from wherever they are based. And the other category is the international general finance media, and the top three candidates who came out on top there were Tom Wilson, energy correspondent at the Financial Times, Dan Murphy, anchor and correspondent at CNBC, and Anthony Di Paola, Middle East energy correspondent at Bloomberg. And finally, we also included not the journalist side, but we wanted to include the critical other part of this coin in some ways, is the energy industry corporate communications professionals who, of course, are tasked with that responsibility from inside the industry to manage and engage the media and to obviously help in obviously channeling their own message, but also channeling understanding of these complicated subjects. And so an important part for our industry to have a very active and productive relationship with the corporate communications professionals. And so we asked the journalists to nominate those corporate communications professionals working in energy industry that they work with, that they think are doing a pretty good job. And they came up with this top three shortlist. Fatma El-Khaja, Integrated Brand Manager at Enoch. Abir Masood, Communications Director, Middle East and Africa at GE Vernova. And Ian Cracknell, VP Communications and CSR at ADNOC Drilling. And those top three candidates were what surfaced after the voting by the International Energy Journalists Selection Committee. So now I'm going to invite His Highness to come to the stage, and we will announce each winner, and he will present the award, and we'll call up each winner to come. So Your Highness, if you would please. If you just stay here, the awards will come from your left. Okay, drum roll? No, we don't need to drum roll, but nonetheless, we will go through each journalist and each category as we just did. So, Middle East Media, Arabic language, the winner of this award is, pull it up on the board, please. There it is. Paula Naouf, Senior Reporter, CNN Business Arabic, please come to the stage. And if we could have the other winners also ready by Diala here to come onto the stage. So please. Middle East Media English language, the winner is Brandy Scott, presenter Business Breakfast, Dubai Eye Radio. Like good journalists, they never do what they're told. They're staying down in their seats. And here is Brandy. Brandy Mabrouk, well-deserved. Brandy is one of the leading journalists in the country and has been for many years, and makes driving to work every morning very pleasurable and informative. And so Brandy, congrats to you in your achievements, and keep it up, because that drive to work is getting longer every day because the traffic is certainly building up in Dubai. International Energy Specialist Media, the #1 winner is Nader Atayem, Middle East Bureau Chief, Argus Media. Nader, please come to receive your award. Congratulations. Nader leads a team of very competent energy industry journalists who tackle very difficult subjects every day and do a really good job at doing that. I'm going to move to the corporate communications because I'm not sure one of our winners has been driving very quickly from Dubai this morning because he's just come off air and I'm not sure he's made it on time. But the Energy Industry Corporate Communications Executive of the Year goes to Abir Masood, Communications Director, Middle East and Africa at GE Vernova. And I would totally agree with that. I've worked with Abir a number of times over the years. She does a very good job, a very competent professional. The winner of the general financial media, which I believe is not here, Dan Murphy, we will acknowledge, but we will move to the final winner. And this one is slightly inside baseball, as they say in America. This is the International Energy Journalist Lifetime Achievement Award, and somewhat biased because it is Diala Sabag, Editor-in-Chief at GI Publishing, former energy correspondent for Dow Jones Newswires, former TV anchor for BBC and CNBC Middle East Business News. And she was voted on by the International Selection Committee for her contribution over decades. And as somebody who's been up close and personal with it, I'd have to agree. Your Highness, thank you very much. Shukran Kathir. Really appreciate you joining us today and doing this award ceremony. It makes it very special. Thank you. And thank you for being with us today. His Highness is going to leave now, and we thank him for his attendance and patronage this morning. As His Highness leaves, we will be moving on to the International Oil Markets panel. And in that regard, I'm going to hand over to the latest International Energy Journalist Lifetime Achievement Award winner to take that session.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you so much. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to His Highness. Let's move on now to our final session here in this room, which is the International Oil Market Outlook panel. And then, of course, after that, we'll be moving out to the round tables. So I'm delighted to have up here, join me please, the four panelists, gentlemen. We need more ladies on these panels. But I'm delighted to have these gentlemen with me. Mr. Guy Moyen, CEO of VTTI, please make your way up. Dave Ernsberger, Head of Market Reporting and Trading Solutions, S&P Global Commodity Insights. Kieran Gallagher, Managing Director of Vitol Bahrain. And Majid Shenouda, Deputy CEO and Global Head of Trading at Mercuria Energy Group. Thanks so much, gentlemen. You should find that hopefully your mics are working there. I'm going to switch now to my lapel mic so I can move around a little bit. Fantastic. And we do have a few more survey questions to put to you and to our audience here to sort of get the ball rolling. Do you have... There you go. I think one of you is missing. Oh, you all have one. Okay, fantastic. Oh. Have extras, that's fine. We have a Okay, thanks very much. I think we've obviously heard a lot of commentary this morning and yesterday from the OPEC General on the sort of market outlook. A few more comments this morning from Mark and Peter, which were very insightful, and we may see that ground covered a bit in the survey questions put to you today. So look forward to having your insights now on that. I would like to start with our first survey question for this panel. So can we put that up, please, Emma? And we'll sort of start off with that question for the audience and for our panel, which is, this sort of narrative of what everyone was expecting at the beginning of this year and what has transpired so far, i.e., at the beginning of the year, we had a confident narrative that it would be a year defined of two halves, with recession hitting the G7 economies and global markets being saved by China's recovery during the second half of the year. And neither have really happened. There's an argument that China growth has been robust, but has disappointed to an extent. And of course, we don't really see recession yet hitting the G7. Generally speaking, Europe is suffering, but the US, for the time being, is fine. So what does that tell us about how we look towards next year? And what's the outlook for that? And there are your choices. That we will see that reverse a bit. China will show signs of stronger recovery as government stimulus takes effect, and we see that kicking into consumer behavior and into industry. The G7 economies will definitely head into recession finally next year as central bank policy starts to bite, or none of those two will happen and we'll see an exact repeat of what we saw this year continuing. So let's have 10 seconds on the clock. We'll see what our audience has to say about that. Okay, gentlemen, there's the results. You'll see them behind you. 42% think that we're going to see a continuation of the trends that we've seen this year. The other two, 34%, that China, a bit more positive thinking there on China, and that recession, 24%, will happen. I'd like to go to Guy, first of all, to you, with your sort of response to that question yourself. What's your sentiment on what we're going to see next year as we stand here? You have to switch on the mic, yeah. Perfect.
Thank you, and it's Guy, I'm from Belgium.
Guy.
So no problem.
No problem.
But first of all, I wanted to extend my appreciation of my presence here at the 11th Forum under patronage of His Highness Sheikh Hamad bin Mohammed Al Sharqi. Feel privilege of being here. In terms of the question itself, I had a quick look yesterday at the IMF report, and they are predicting for 2024 a lower growth than for, although minimal, 2.9% versus 3% this year. So I guess yeah, could have the same repeat as what happens this year, although I tend to agree that particularly Europe is probably in for a more difficult time.
Okay. Dave, let's go to you with that. How did you vote, first of all, in that question?
First of all, mic check. Okay. Second of all, Diala, congratulations on your Lifetime Achievement Award.
Thank you.
Herman, wherever you are, you were robbed. No, congratulations to my Argus colleague in the audience. I'm sure he did a great job. So on the question here, I voted with the 42%. Actually, from S&P Global Commodity Insights, our research team very much sees an extension of 2023 into 2024, but more in miniature. So just at a high level, the way I see this year, despite all the headlines and stories, generally speaking, being about OPEC+, in fact, there was very symmetrical market economics going on the one hand with supply, where the US added 1.4 million barrels a day of production capacity, and China brought back, more than 1 million barrels a day of oil demand. So next year we see that cutting in half, extra 700,000 barrels a day of US oil production coming to market, and about 450,000 barrels a day of demand recovery in China, maybe a tiny bit more if we're lucky. So the big picture marginal outcome is the same, only smaller. And then what that leaves is the space in the middle, generally speaking, for people to fight things out a little bit on price. So all things being equal, which of course is a heck of a caveat, I would vote with the 42% that sees 24 being like 23, but smaller, frankly.
Okay, thanks for that, Dave. Kieran, just in terms of that 42% that we're going to sort of see more of the same, how much has the China reality of, let's face it, it's changing its economic structure, this is the new normal for China, has the market actually really, really absorbed that? Is it believing that? Or is it still holding out that maybe not next year, but at some point China's going to come roaring back? And how is it planning for that?
Yes, good morning, Diala, and good to be back at the forum in Fujairah again. I think there's a cautious optimism around China, to be honest. We're seeing the government there. We have an expectation of generous stimulus going into 2024. Certainly the bulk of the oil demand outlook falls east of Suez again, primarily in China and India, and it continues to be the case. I think, overall there is a cautious optimism for certain, with regards to recessionary concerns. I think there's certainly economic headwinds, but, amongst the sort of the respective publications that everyone in the room tends to look at, I don't think anyone is calling for a recession. And, you know, whilst we acknowledge the higher interest rate environment and that the picture in Europe doesn't look so rosy, we're not sure we're at sort of real recession sort of danger yet. And with that, you know, the market is looking at sort of where is the grass greener? That's certainly east of Suez. And we would, in-house, we would certainly look at China, and I think with the stimulus policies, we're quite optimistic that we'll see some generous growth there into 2024.
Majid, also just tell us how you voted and where you feel on this question, and also if you can address, I'd like to also just address, which is kind of part of this outlook, is that this discrepancy that we've seen amongst agencies on tightness or no tightness, demand, etc., this year and going into next year, and how much is that impacting people like you in the market in terms of your decisions?
Well, I voted C because I didn't know how to answer the question properly, because I think both A and B are likely to happen. I think the G7 has a high probability going into recession. I do see some improvement in China, so I don't know what button to press, so I didn't really answer the question properly. But in terms of, I think what's happened over the last year or so, but you know, a lot of the issues that we're facing today, they stem back to 2008. You know, all this quantitative easing has been a real issue. And I think it's affecting the G7 more than most. I think the market is fading the impact of high interest rates. And I think when people think about the cost of funding, I think, you know, people look at LIBOR and SOFR, but if you actually try and raise money, we're talking to a region that is cash rich, but the rest of the world isn't cash rich. If you go and look at the IMF, there's a lot of countries on the watch list that, you know, there are a lot of regions that have problems. And I don't think people understand the real implication of raising capital for, you know, for producing assets. And I think that's why we're going to start seeing, I don't think inflation is under control. And I think there's going to be a real problem there. You know, there are people out there who are trying to raise capital at 20+%. That's just not sustainable. And that, you know, and those are all producers. I think Mercuria probably did one of the first oil IPOs this year. There hadn't been one in 3 years, and it was a small IPO, somewhere in the region of $250 million raise, and it nearly failed. There is no capital that's available for this industry. In terms of, you know, China, I know we all like to look at, you know, oil prices and gas prices, but there are different matrices that I think people need to look at when it comes to China. You have to look at, you have to look at iron ore as an indicator. You have to look at copper as an indicator, and they haven't been performing very well this year, but the signs look better. But generally, and I'm waffling a bit, but generally, I don't think the outlook is that great. In terms of what Mercuria is trying to do, I think we're trying to, you know, make sure that we have enough capital to deal with, you know, volatility. You know, last year was a very stressful period for the traders, even though it ended up being relatively good. Those who didn't have access to capital, those who weren't able to meet margin calls, got themselves into difficulty. And I think most of the traders now realize that you have to have CoreX capital. So we try to do that. We try to get a balance in how we manage our VAR. We try to make sure that we have a diverse portfolio. I'm sure Vitor and everyone else is doing the same thing. So, you know, we have a balance between our gas and power businesses and our oil businesses. We try and get the right balance between the old economy and the energy mix. So, you know, our CEO, you know, a few years ago basically, you know, stipulated that the firm would put, you know, more than 50% of its asset base into the energy transition, and, you know, we're pretty much there now. So the key is diversification, but I wouldn't say the world is that rosy. If you look at, you know, who's actually doing well, it's the old economy, the producer, and the energy transition. If you look at the costs to deal with energy transition, it's very marginal. You know, you're better off putting dollar in old economy than new economy.
Okay, thanks, Majid. Let's go to our second survey question. That does talk a bit about, you know, how traders are making their decisions and how they're being able to judge this market, and you know, what indications are we getting, for example, from OPEC Plus going forward? This year, their policy has achieved a reduction in volatility, reaching near 10-year lows earlier in September. So that sort of target of theirs to balance the market so that we make it less volatile. There's opinions out there on that, but can its light-handed regulation, i.e. what it's doing on output, cuts that we've seen that activity in the last year, can that continue to control and manage volatility in these markets for the rest of the year and next year? So can OPEC Plus policy, which many say has been a success in terms of what it's set out to do, can that continue? Yes, OPEC Plus will continue to be able to manage, to use its output adjustment mechanism to efficiently influence oil balances, maybe not prices, but that comes as a consequence. No, there is just simply too many unknowns now, and they're piling up. Outlook for China demand, OECD recession still in question, Middle East regional conflict. Of course, we've still got the Russia-Ukraine war going on. So too many things, too many unknowns now that policy will continue to work as effectively. So A or B, will it continue to work or not? Assuming that they continue to implement it next year. Okay, 58% say that is workable as we go on. Dave, I'd just like to go to you on that and talk a little bit about, we've seen prices, fairly stable in terms of within a band, not week to week, but if you look at the year as a whole. But, we do have a lot of tensions, Russia, Ukraine, we've got now regional tensions as well on top of that. How much today, in today's price, would you say is geopolitical risk been factored in already? Because we didn't really see a huge reaction last week, did we?
Well, I saw a lot of reporting about geopolitical risk being priced in already, but I think the reason the markets didn't respond more bullishly to the war breaking out between Israel and Hamas is because of the implied production capacity that is being held back from the market, that is hypothetically, theoretically there in the event of a price spike. So it's not so much for me that geopolitics is priced in, it's more that there's a significant amount of production that's not being produced that could be brought to market in the event of a true crisis. And that's always in people's minds. Is that me? No, okay. And the bigger spikes we've seen in response to geopolitical events have been when production capacity has been at low levels relative to what's currently being produced, so minimal available extra storage production capacity. So I think that's the big issue here. And of course, crude prices are up $25 a barrel in total since the production cuts came into effect from OPEC Plus, and that is the big driver, is that production has been held back, has started to eat significantly into visible inventories of oil over time, and that has been the catalyst for higher headline prices. In effect, we got to $85 faster than we would have done otherwise, and we would have been here by now had the war broken out and those price rallies hadn't already happened.
Okay. Kieran, I'd like to talk a little bit about sort of product prices as well out there, because of course crude prices have done what they've done, but there seems to have been more impact from Russia-Ukraine war on product prices, really. Obviously, we've seen the crude still flowing. Products have also changed flows, but there has been tightness, more tightness, if you like. Arguably, diesel's had a challenge, gasoline prices for a while in the US. Where's the concern going forward, do you think, next year in terms of sensitivity to prices from consumers and business? Is it on the crude side? Is it on the product side? And where do you see that going?
Yes, you're right that there's been a significant degree of volatility on the product segment. I think that's first half of this year that's settled somewhat, particularly around Q2. But I guess you go back to the Russia-Ukraine initial volatility from the fallout last year, and it was such a big product export market, and the follow-on distortion of flows that resulted in that from self-sanctioning, etc. Then there was natural volatility to follow on from that. The global markets have as they often do, sort of found their way to work around that, and which brings back relevance to this geography that we're standing here right now. Markets have calmed a little bit because the addition of refining capacity. in this region, and therefore, whilst there has been a little bit of volatility over the last couple of months, particularly in the middle distillate markets, there's a little bit more stability further out, and that's with expectation that Al Zour in Kuwait comes on, Duqm refinery in Oman, and there's further ramp up possible in Jizan as well. So there is, there's the possibility to point to more capacity and more product available to market. So then it goes back to the supply argument elsewhere on the product front. And do we see distortions like we did 10 days ago in terms of the Russian export ban on diesel that caused an initial volatility? So it's always subject to headlines like that. But in the main, I think we're for the first time in many years, we can point to some significant refinery capacity short term coming to market that will perhaps add a bit of stability going into 2024.
Okay, thanks very much, Kieran. Guy, to go to you with that sort of same theme of Gulf refiners, new capacity coming on stream, of course, even more. But already we've seen quite a bit of, because of the change of product flows from the Russian angle, we've seen Gulf refiners, we've seen Fujairah even taking certain fuels, and a change in that sort of export trend, if you like, in the region of products because of that. Can the world rely on the Gulf to make up completely for any shortfall to come from Russia going forward, even on the product side? And where do you think we stand on that?
First, as being in charge of VTTI, which is an infrastructure company with here in Fujairah about 2 million metric cubes of storage capacity. So while we follow with interest, I would say, oil price movements, we don't take pricing risk. And for us, it's more about how is the market structure. Is it in contango, in backwardation, that influences the demand for storage. And then the other interesting thing, as you just mentioned, as a result of all the turmoil over the past two years, product flows have changed quite dramatically. And what we can see, particularly here in Fujairah, is a really increased demand for storage. Not only you can see it in some of the recent thermal transactions and the price that was paid to get access to storage here, but we can also see it in terms of the demand for storage, for blending, etc. I think we need to put things in perspective. While this region can do a lot, as was mentioned earlier, it is the third largest bunkering hub. I think Singapore Strait is about 5 times as big, but I do believe that the Gulf region can play quite a big role, and particularly also, as Kieran said, with all the new refining capacity coming on stream, I think we are seeing much more, and we can see it also in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam, where we see more products, particularly diesel middle distillate, coming in from this region.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, we're going to put up a survey question that sort of, does correspond to what we've just talked about, but I'd like to get the audience's tack on that as well. So let's put that up, please. The third survey question, which sort of talks about how Russia-Ukraine conflict has opened up opportunities for Gulf refiners, such as replacing the lost diesel exports from Russia. So far, that's a figure that we've lost so far. We don't know what's to come, and new arbitrage windows for the import and export of products. Saudi also has been benefiting a little bit from that and using that to help it even manage its crude output as well in terms of what it's doing within OPEC. But do you agree or disagree that the Russian conflict has opened up opportunities for the Gulf refiners, will open up more opportunity going forward? Agree or disagree? Okay, 74%. Majid, I'd like to go to you and just ask you what your opinion of that is. Do you think that is going to give confidence to consumers, obviously, of these products, that we're going to have reasonable diesel prices going forward next year, more reasonable gasoline prices, and avoid those spikes that we may see from continuing conflict in Russia?
I did vote agree, because I do think that both having the right by having the right infrastructure, obviously you can have different runs. But I think the other phenomenon that's happening is people are consuming Russian gas oil and exporting their own just to make sure that they take advantage of the arbitrage. So I don't think that there's an issue. I think if there is good demand next year, outside some sort of geopolitical problems that might have turned up from a week ago, I think there's enough crude out there, and I think there's enough refining capacity out there. I think 2024 should look like a much more balanced picture than 2023. So I don't think there's a real issue in terms of whether it's gas or products. When you just look at KPC and other refineries that are coming online, and there's enough product out there to run, so I don't think there's a real issue.
Yeah, and what about, Dave, just to focus a bit on Europe. Europe as an economy, as a continent, is suffering a bit more, showing signs of stress, both from directly being impacted, obviously, by Russian supply, but it's managed to kind of make ends meet, particularly gas. We're not going to talk too much about gas today. But would you sort of agree with Majid's earlier comments about sort of the outlook for economies in terms of how much stress they're going to come under, central bank policy, interest rates? He seems to think that hasn't filtered through. It'll start to show more in terms of borrowing costs for corporates, etc. What's the sentiment in Europe on that?
Well, I live in London, so I observe the sentiment firsthand in the UK every day and regularly visit Amsterdam and go to the continent, so I see that too. Europe has been fortunate, really, to be able to afford the very high price that it's paid with the diversion of relatively affordable energy supplies, not just oil, but also natural gas, and the replacement of that with relatively expensive sources. So Europe has done, I would say, surprisingly well, considering the stress that would introduce onto any economy. And of course, the US hasn't faced that in quite the same way because it has so much of its own production. So for sure, I would agree with the assessment from Majid that higher interest rates, should they continue, a hawkish central bank policy in general, those will continue to layer pressure onto Europe. But I actually would take a slightly different perspective, which is that Europe actually shows like mind-boggling resilience in the face of all of that. I'm not suggesting it's about to go on a growth run or anything, but sort of treading water seems to be the mood, cutting back on infrastructure projects where they're not needed. HS2 is a big story in the UK. Ultimately, it's an infrastructure project that's not needed in quite the same way that maybe other infrastructure is. So all of these things ultimately depress growth in the long term, but I'm not necessarily expecting to see a huge recession kick in either.
Well, we're just going to wrap up now. I want to put a question to our four panelists before I release them. But we had a question at the beginning about average oil prices this year so far and what will be the average oil price. But I want to ask each of you whether you think we'll hit that $100 number this year. 2 weeks ago, everyone was saying we would. Then that retreated a bit. Majid, I'll go to you first. You're not going to be, we're not going to quote you on this necessarily, but is there enough momentum in the last 2 months, 3 months of this year to hit that with everything that's going on?
I think the consensus from traders in Q4 that we were going to see significant crude draws, and the trade was expecting the market to go up. Whether it was going to go to 100, I don't think there are that many analysts that believe that it was going to go to 100 in a normal circumstance. I think the events that have happened recently, I think that puts a grey cloud where things could go, because the market is not pricing much of a conflict. For volatility, you talked about volatility. Prior to this, volatility was running roughly about 15%. On the weekend, that went to 32%. So the volatility went up, but the price action was actually quite muted. I mean, $3 a barrel is not that significant. So the market is fading any real action. But there is a high probability, and I think people aren't thinking about this right, there's a high probability that this could escalate. And if it does escalate, then I think we can see $100. So I'm answering it in two ways. In normal circumstances, I don't think we'll see it this year. But if something escalates, then I think it's quite likely that we might see $100.
Kieran, and even though we have all this spare capacity now in the system at the moment, at least from the region.
Yeah, I'd agree with Majid. The Q4 outlook on demand is quite healthy. And therefore, there's an argument to say that we'd still be at a healthy price set. I think what we need to remember is the run from 85 to 95 happened quite quickly. There was a huge amount of managed money in that run up, and which came out of the market quite quickly at 95 again. So is there fundamental reasons why we hit $100? That's questionable. I think we would need to see a geopolitical event to perhaps hit that. But certainly the demand look is certainly healthy enough to keep us around the $90 price set.
Risk on.
Thank you. So at Platts, we don't trade oil, obviously. We don't take positions in the market, neither the rest of S&P Global. Not suggesting anybody here is talking a book by any way. I'm just saying, we don't trade. So my answer should be taken in the perspective of I'm not trading in the market, right? So therefore, what do I know? But, dated Brent got to $98 a barrel that 10 or 15 days ago, something like that. It was notable to me that there's massive resistance around 100. Just huge resistance that you see. When you get close to 100, there's a lot of resistance around that level. So I would agree that absent an escalation of the war, either war, frankly, at this point, it's hard to see oil hitting 100 before the end of the year, and even harder to see it staying there.
Okay, thanks. Guy, you have the last word.
Like my colleague, we are not trading. And so I would say the market currently is in slight backwardation, I believe. And I don't think it will get in contango anytime soon.
Okay, all right, so there you go. That's the pulse of our panelists. So I didn't put that survey to the room. But please, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the gentlemen here on stage. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your commentary. And time will tell if you're correct, please, if you take your seats. Thank you. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. Well, that wraps up the plenary session here for today. We're going to now move on to the closed-door roundtables, which are on the mezzanine level, except for the first one, BB, what we call Roundtable 1, which is just to your right as you come out. There will be coffee served at those roundtable venues, so just please make your way there, and we'll start. And then those wrap up around 1 o'clock. And that wraps up the forum, actually, for us this year. So I'd like to thank you all for coming and enjoy the rest of the program and look forward to seeing you all next year in Fujairah. Thank you so much. And lunch will be back here after the roundtable sessions. Lunch will be served back here in the ballroom. Thank you very much.
test. Hello, mic test. Hello, 1, 2, 3. Hello, 1. 1, 2, 3. Hello, 1, 2, 3.